Canada's economic strategy is shifting into overdrive. What started as a response to U.S. trade pressures is now morphing into a full-throttle drive for economic independence. Could Canada be setting itself up to break free from the U.S. economic dominance and create a future all on its own? These transformative changes are becoming a reality as Canada invests over $187 billion in infrastructure through the Investing in Canada plan, aiming to enhance public transit, green energy, and trade corridors nationwide. Canada's economic future is changing rapidly. A combination of political strategies, bold infrastructure projects, and a focus on sustainability is positioning the country to become a key player in global trade. The recent trade war with the U.S. turned out to be the catalyst that Canada needed. So, let's take a closer look at these seismic shifts, the major developments that are steering Canada's future. Chapter 1. The U.S. trade strategy that backfired in 2018. The Trump administration imposed tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, as well as other critical exports. The move was intended to force Canada into submission, weakening its economic reliance on the U.S. But instead, it sparked a shift in Canada's approach. In fact, the Canadian government took a strong stand, using these tariffs as a wake-up call to accelerate its own plans for economic self-sufficiency. Canada had long relied on the U.S. as its primary trading partner, with around 75% of Canadian exports heading south. But these tariffs exposed the vulnerabilities in this trade dependency. In response, Canada didn't back down. It struck hard, planning 18 critical infrastructure projects to diversify and strengthen its economy. British Columbia alone has fast-tracked 18 major projects, focusing on key industries like mining, energy, and logistics. For example, the $1.5 billion expansion of the Port of Vancouver is designed to significantly increase Canada's export capacity, reducing its dependence on U.S. infrastructure. And it's not just British Columbia. Projects across the country are being fast-tracked to make Canada more resilient in the face of these new economic challenges. Canada has now set its sights on not just surviving the tariffs, but thriving beyond the U.S. market. By reinvesting in its infrastructure and diversifying its trade partnerships, Canada is rewriting the economic rulebook, not just adapting to changes, but taking the lead. Canada's investments in critical infrastructure, including a fast-tracked 18 major projects, will create tens of thousands of jobs. For example, British Columbia's commitment to developing 18 key infrastructure projects is expected to generate over $10 billion in economic activity. Chapter 2. The pipeline overhaul, bypassing the U.S. Canada's oil and gas industry has long been intertwined with the U.S. economy. Historically, most of Canada's crude oil was exported to the U.S. for refining, but now, Canada is taking bold steps to break free from this dependency. Several major pipeline projects, including the Trans Mountain Expansion Project, are being fast-tracked to ensure that Canada's energy resources can stay within its borders, serving its own refineries and reaching new markets. By keeping this valuable resource within the country, Canada is positioning itself as a leader in North American energy production. But it's not just oil and gas. Canada's government is also making significant investments in renewable energy projects. Over the last 5 years, Canada's solar energy capacity has grown by 92%, and wind energy projects are surging as well. BC Canada's current official targets focus on achieving a 40-45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from 2005 levels by 2030 and reaching net zero emissions by 2050. Through these combined efforts, the overhaul of its energy pipelines and rapid expansion of renewable energy sources, Canada is not only future-proofing its energy sector, but also reducing its dependence on U.S. refineries, making its energy industry more resilient and sustainable. The overhaul of Canada's energy infrastructure, including new east-west pipeline projects, means less reliance on U.S. refineries and more control over energy pricing. Canada's oil industry, which produced approximately 5.6 million barrels per day in 2023 according to the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, could see a reduction in export costs, potentially stabilizing gas prices domestically. Some analysts predict this could lower prices at the pump by up to 5–10% over the next 5 years, depending on global oil price fluctuations. Chapter 3. The mining expansion, Canada's big power play. With the global shift toward electric vehicles (EVs), demand for critical minerals is skyrocketing. Lithium, copper, and rare earth elements are essential for manufacturing EV batteries and other clean tech, and currently, China dominates the global supply chain. But Canada is stepping in to change the game. Canada is home to vast mineral reserves, and the country is fast-tracking mining projects to tap into them. The country's northern regions, particularly in Quebec and Ontario, are already home to rich deposits of these essential minerals. In fact, Canada ranks among the top 10 global producers of lithium and nickel, two key minerals in the EV supply chain. Canada is positioning itself to become a key global supplier of materials necessary for the clean energy revolution. The country is already in discussions with major tech companies and electric vehicle manufacturers to supply these minerals, creating opportunities for new trade partnerships beyond the U.S. This move could significantly reduce Canada's reliance on foreign suppliers and allow it to capture a larger share of the global clean tech market. If successful, this strategy would place Canada in the driver's seat of the global clean tech industry. With the world's push towards electric vehicles and sustainable technologies, Canada is set to become a critical player in this multi-billion-dollar sector. In 2025, Canada is set to invest $6.15 billion in new mining projects. This will create jobs in key resource areas, particularly in Ontario, Quebec, and British Columbia. For Canadians in rural mining communities, the influx of investment could mean higher wages and more job opportunities. Additionally, regions like Northern Ontario, which rely on mining for economic activity, could see a 10% increase in local economic growth, which would contribute to improved infrastructure and more community programs. Chapter 4: Ports and Logistics. The silent game changer. Canada's ports are quietly undergoing a transformation. With massive investments being made in port capacity and shore power technology, Canada is positioning its ports to play a pivotal role in reshaping global trade. The Port of Vancouver, for example, is undergoing a $3.5 billion expansion project that will allow it to increase the port's container capacity by 2.4 million 20-foot equivalent units TEUs annually, representing a 50% boost. One of the most innovative moves is the introduction of shore power technology. This allows cargo ships to plug into the power grid while docked, reducing emissions and lowering operating costs for shipping companies. With growing concerns about the environmental impact of shipping, this technology positions Canadian ports as a more sustainable and cost-effective option for international trade. Ports like Vancouver and Prince Rupert are expanding their capacity to accommodate the growing demand for goods movement. These expansions, combined with improved logistics systems, will help reduce Canada's reliance on U.S. shipping infrastructure and position Canada as a key player in the global supply chain. By focusing on port expansion and improving logistics, Canada is setting the stage for a new era of international trade, one where it has more control and leverage over its global partnerships. Canada's ongoing expansion of its ports is a critical development, with Vancouver's port seeing $3.5 billion in expansion investments. These investments will result in faster processing of goods and more competitive shipping routes. As a result, Canadian consumers will experience a reduction in the cost of imported goods. According to the Canada Border Services Agency, CBSA, this could lead to a reduction in shipping costs for both consumers and businesses over the next few years. Chapter 5: Green Energy, Canada's long-term power play. In the past 5 years alone, Canada has increased its solar energy capacity by 92%, and now over 96,000 solar installations are in place across the country. With ambitious goals for the future, Canada plans to increase its renewable energy share to 30% by 2025. The country is also ramping up investments in wind and hydroelectric energy, targeting a greener, more diversified energy grid. As nations around the world seek sustainable energy solutions, Canada is positioning itself as a global leader in clean energy. The country is already one of the largest producers of hydroelectric power globally, and the recent surge in solar and wind energy positions Canada to meet the growing demand for clean energy, especially from Europe and Asia. This green energy shift isn't just about reducing emissions, it's about economic resilience. By investing in renewable energy, Canada is insulating itself from the volatility of oil price fluctuations and ensuring that its energy sector is not reliant on global fossil fuel markets. As Canada invests heavily in renewable energy, Canada's broader energy goals include generating 90% of its electricity from non-emitting sources by 2030. This transition to cleaner energy sources will lower the volatility of energy prices, particularly in the winter months when heating costs spike. For consumers, This could translate into a 15–20% reduction in monthly energy bills, especially for households in rural areas that have higher energy demands. Chapter 6: Infrastructure Overhaul, Building the New Backbone. To support its growing economy, Canada is undergoing an extensive infrastructure overhaul. Since 2017, the Canadian government has allocated over $4.1 billion to enhance transportation networks, including roads, railways, airports, and marine shipping lanes. The federal government is investing in our supply chains, making them more resilient and competitive for long-term economic growth. These projects from the announcement today will strengthen our railway system, diversify the local economy, and eliminate more barriers to internal trade among provinces and territories. Wilson Miao, Member of Parliament, Richmond Centre. This modernization is critical for improving trade efficiency both within Canada and with international partners. One standout project in this infrastructure renaissance is the Gordie Howe International Bridge, which is set to open in 2025. This bridge will directly link Detroit, Michigan to Windsor, Ontario, facilitating uninterrupted freeway traffic and strengthening cross-border trade between Canada and the U.S. The bridge will also reduce congestion at the existing Ambassador Bridge, which handles $200 billion worth of trade annually. The infrastructure upgrades aren't just for international trade, they're also designed to improve domestic connectivity. Faster and more reliable transportation routes will reduce logistical bottlenecks and lower transportation costs, creating a more competitive environment for Canadian businesses. The expansion of digital networks is also set to enhance Canada's connectivity, making it easier for businesses to engage in e-commerce and access global markets. By 2025, projections suggest that Canada's infrastructure investments will surpass CAD $300 billion. This massive investment will lay the foundation for Canada to become a central hub for international commerce, with faster trade routes and modernized infrastructure positioning the nation as a key player in the global supply chain. With improved infrastructure, faster processing times at ports, and more efficient transport networks will allow goods to move more swiftly and at lower costs. This will benefit Canadian consumers through faster delivery times on a variety of products, from groceries to high-tech gadgets, which could result in lower retail prices and greater availability of goods. Chapter 7: Diversifying Trade Beyond the U.S. Perhaps the most transformative shift is Canada's assertive move to broaden its trade horizons. Historically, the U.S. has been Canada's largest trading partner, but now Canada is looking to diversify its trade relationships. The goal is to reduce its over-reliance on the U.S. market and mitigate risks associated with trade fluctuations or geopolitical tensions. Canada is actively working to secure trade agreements with Europe, Asia, and emerging markets. The Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership (CPTPP), which Canada joined in 2018, is a key part of this strategy. The agreement opens up trade with countries like Japan, Australia, and Vietnam, significantly boosting Canada's exports in energy, agriculture, and technology. One of Canada's most significant new ventures is its push into the liquefied natural gas (LNG) market. The country's first LNG project, backed by Shell, is expected to commence exports to Asia in 2025. This will open new markets for Canada's natural gas and reduce its dependence on U.S. trade routes, diversifying the country's energy exports to new and rapidly growing markets in Asia. Through these strategic moves, Canada is setting itself up as a global trade leader, not just a supplier to the U.S. By broadening its trade relationships and securing access to alternative markets, Canada is not only strengthening its own economic independence, but also increasing its influence in global economic negotiations. To recap, Canada's economic transformation is marked by 7 major shifts, responding to U.S. tariffs with bold infrastructure investments, overhauling its energy sector to reduce dependency on the U.S., expanding its mining sector to capitalize on the electric vehicle boom, revamping ports and logistics, accelerating its green energy sector, modernizing infrastructure, and diversifying its trade relationships beyond the U.S. Each of these shifts is designed to make Canada more resilient, self-reliant, and competitive on the global stage. What do you think? Is Canada on the path to economic independence, or are these plans reaching beyond their grasp? Share your thoughts in the comments below.